Okay, thank you very much, everybody. You're all very welcome to our last public lecture of the year. And I'm delighted we're going to have a very interesting session on nutrition and eating behaviour from Professor Bennett, Annemarie Bennett from Trinity's Medical School, and also from Chloe Murphy, who's out there in the community, one of the staunch care health communities on the front line giving nutrition advice, right? And Imelda's going to open our session for us. Do you want to come here, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome. So my name is Imelda Hanratty from Oncusan Education Centre and Early Years in Jobestown, Tallaght. And as usual, we're joined by our University of the Third Age group here today. And we've had a wonderful year with all the talks. So we're looking forward to our last one now, and then hopefully looking forward to some new ones starting off in the new season in October. So in Oncusan, we usually start any of our events with just a little quiet moment. So if you just take a moment just to sit and relax, and I'll just read a little short poem. We all experience soul moments in life. When we see a magnificent sunrise, hear the call of a loon, see the wrinkles in our mother's hands, or smell the sweetness of a bay. During these moments, our body, as well as our brain, resonates as we experience the glory of being a human being. And that's soul moments from a book called Taking Time to Just Be. So thank you, everybody. I'm looking forward to our talk. Yep.
Yes, so good afternoon all. Share my screen here. There we go. Yeah, so good afternoon all. I'm Annemarie Bennett, and I'll be presenting this afternoon alongside Chloe. Chloe will be going through some of the programs that are available in the community to support health in older age and as we move into retirement. So what I'm going to do is, I suppose, talk about some of the research that those programs that support health at that stage of life, the research that those programs are based on. So hopefully you'll get a sense of like from the research that I'm talking about, of how it actually translates into practice on the ground. So hopefully it'll be a nice balance between those two sides. So I'm going to discuss, I suppose, key principles of good nutrition as we age, and there'll be 6 that I'll have a look at overall today. The first is around making as many meals and snacks as sociable as we can, to choose foods that are higher in fibre and nutrient rich, to eat good quality protein to protect our muscle strength, to protect our bones with enough calcium and vitamin D, to mind our best weight, and to keep moving. And I suppose if we look at the first one here around making as many meals and snacks as sociable as you can, obviously we know that eating is a biological necessity. It's required for our survival. But it also is an important element of living like a sociable social life. So the thing, obviously, shared meals and sociable meal times and snacks are obviously important throughout the whole life course, but perhaps especially as we move into retirement and older age, because our appetite tends to decrease. And I suppose when we look at some of the benefits of shared sociable meal times, that helps to mitigate some of the less positive impacts of our appetite decreasing, for example. So we know that when we share meal times with others, we have a greater motivation to cook and prepare foods. So we can often be more motivated when we're preparing meals for obviously 2 or more people rather than 1 person. We often have greater food enjoyment. So eating the same dish by yourself versus with somebody that you have a positive social connection with, we often enjoy that same food more when it's with somebody else. We also have improved nutritional nutritional intakes when we like share meals and snacks. And I suppose that that's quite logical when we think of even like the likes of a food shop, where if you're always cooking for one, you're likely to have fewer foods, and you're likely to cook meals that have a smaller number of ingredients within them. And often, sometimes if we're cooking for one, sometimes we can aim for kind of those shorter meals and snacks. And they often kind of center around, say, like a starchy food, so like bread or pasta, for example. And then maybe a protein, so like eggs or tuna, for example. But we often, like the short straw, I suppose vegetables often pull the short straw in that regard. So we often find that if we're eating as a group with others, and we tend to have a greater diversity of foods that we just naturally consume, and that those foods themselves tend to present more dietary diversity that's beneficial for health. And then that obviously in turn over time reduces the risk of adverse outcomes, like, for example, type 2 diabetes or heart disease, or where those conditions have already been diagnosed. Shared mealtimes help in the management of those conditions, and help to help perhaps slow their progression. Social isolation and loneliness is obviously something that we do hear about more perhaps as we age. And excuse me, a systematic review and a meta-analysis, which is essentially an approach to research that pulls together lots of studies that have looked at, say, the same health outcome and the same a very similar population or age range. And it's almost like then creating one very large study to look at patterns in data. And so this recent review looked at social isolation and its impact on health outcomes. And we know, I suppose, that the difference between social isolation and loneliness is that social isolation very much refers to an absence of meaningful social connection. So like where that's very limited. Whereas loneliness is much more subjective, in that what makes one person feel lonely might not make another feel the same way. And then we can still have very good social connections. We could be in a room of family members and occasionally feel a little bit lonely. So both have less positive or have more negative effects on our health, but social isolation has a more profoundly negative effect on our health. In this review, persons who kind of experience persistent social isolation had an increased risk of death from cardiovascular disease by up to 34%, and from cancer by up to 24%. So it has a really profound physical and cognitive adverse effect on us. And shared meals are one such way in which we can reduce the risk of experiencing social isolation. And of course, as we age, though sharing meal times and making meal times as sociable as possible can become more of a challenge as children move out of home, or grandchildren don't need to be minded anymore, and sometimes maybe perhaps partners, obviously, or spouses pass away. But of course, it doesn't need to be all the time to see benefit. We don't, not every meal and every snack time obviously needs to be sociable for us to experience the benefits of social meals. That actually having a degree of regularity in how sociable our meals are is important. And actually, a study has looked at this in terms of comparing different levels of interaction across meal times, and has found that even having photos of people that you love in your line of sight as you prepare and eat food, that actually has a positive impact on our food behavior and on our nutrient intake. So, and much more so than obviously if you're just eating by yourself without any, I suppose, positive reminder of your social connections in your line of sight. This doesn't apply to television, just to note, it's like a social interaction. The television is kind of too distracting, I suppose, from our meals. It's very difficult to eat mindfully if we have a television in the room. So trying to avoid, or at least for most of your meals, trying to avoid watching television whilst you're eating. So I suppose overall in this section, even before we eat anything, it's about thinking about our environment. Who's there, who's not there, kind of is our environment setting us up for kind of healthier eating behaviors. And like that, when we do have like a positive social presence in the room with us, either as a person or kind of reminders, that just automatically is more likely to set us up for healthier eating behaviors. And then obviously we experience the benefits of that. Then in terms of choosing foods that are higher in fiber and nutrient rich, so This very much refers to the bottom two shelves of the food pyramid. So you're talking about your salads, vegetables and fruits, and then your wholemeal bread, cereals, potatoes, rice and pasta. So those are our bottom two shelves. And obviously the food pyramid can sort of have its drawbacks as a concept, but essentially it's there to let us know like what we should prioritize in terms of types and amounts of foods to eat. And I suppose when we look at those bottom two shelves, something in particular that they share in terms of a nutrient that they provide is fiber, which we know is essential to healthy bowel function. It decreases the risk of constipation. And again, having mentioned our appetite decreasing as we age, if we do experience constipation upon a lower appetite, constipation will further suppress our appetite. So that further decreases the kind of quality of our diet. So that's always something we want to avoid. Up to 80% of older adults in Ireland do not meet the guidelines for fibre intake. So the national studies would have shown this. So we know that it's an area that we need to be perhaps particularly mindful of. And fibre comes in kind of two types, and we need both. It'll generally exist as both of these within kind of a range of foods, but you've soluble and insoluble fibre. Soluble fibre is absorbed effectively, and it has a really positive impact on our blood lipid profile, and particularly like the fibre that we find in fruits, like soft fruits in particular, or the likes of porridge. Which contains a type of fibre called beta-glucan, which is really beneficial for lowering your cholesterol level and improving your blood lipid profile. Insoluble fibre is found more in like grainy breads and like vegetable skins, and that also supports a good blood lipid profile, but it also plays a key role in creating like bulk in your gut. So fibre is very good at absorbing fluid. It's almost like a sponge, so it creates like bulk in your gut, and it's easier for our gut to kind of push through. Like when it has something to push against, it's easier for our gut to be able to like push food through our GI tract when we have more bulk. But and I suppose that can play a role not only in improving transit time, which our transit time is the time it takes, the time that lapses between eating food and excreting that food, but it also helps to reduce our risk of cancer, and particularly bowel cancer. We all eat carcinogens or carcinogenic components to some degree. So really common carcinogens that would be within our diet, or that that we would come across with some regularity, would be the likes of so say if we overcook, and it's all to do with usually cooking method and cooking at too high a heat for too long, but say with starchy foods, so like bread and like say baked potatoes, like root vegetables, for example, there's compounds there that if we overcook, and usually to the point of kind of charring or almost burning toast, say, what's produced as a result of that interaction is acrylamide. It's a compound that the European Food Safety Authority has classed as like a probable carcinogen. So we might consume something of that nature. And similarly with red meat, if we cook that at very high temperatures, so again, if we're like barbecuing or grilling red meat, often for, there's maybe a lot of smoke as well, kind of as part of the cooking method. What's produced are compounds, so you have PAHs, so polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and then you have HCAs, so heterocyclic amines, and they are classed as carcinogenic. So if we do sometimes consume those elements to our food, or charred bits to food. It's not to say obviously that you're going to get cancer with that, obviously, but more that it increases our risk. But when we have fibre and we've more bulk in our gut, it's likely that those potential compounds spend less time kind of against the wall potentially of the gut. They're almost slightly more diluted, and so there's a benefit, I suppose, to eating fibre in terms of that regard as well. Fibre also mediates our blood glucose levels. So it has a benefit in terms of, as we know, kind of even in terms of satiety and energy levels over the day, but also in helping to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes. It also supports a healthier microbiome. So our microbiome is like a community of microbes effectively that have many, many different functions in the body. So all the, like mostly bacteria that lives in our gut. And it supports obviously the digestion of our food, our immune system, our brain health. We're learning more and more all the time about how vital the microbiome is to so many different aspects of our health. But a key element to a healthy microbiome is dietary diversity. And I suppose when you think of those bottom two shelves in terms of all the different types of like salads, vegetables, fruit, and kind of a range of different grains, trying to have diversity across those, not necessarily every single day, because we have to be realistic about food shops like week on week. But, you know, if you're looking back, say over the last, say 6 to 8 weeks, you know, has there kind of been a reasonable variety where you've maybe tried like a few different types of vegetables, a few different colors, and different types of grains? Would you say that there's been more diversity in kind of that medium term picture? Prebiotics and probiotics also help. Key difference between prebiotics and probiotics is a prebiotic sort of help what you already have. So they contain compounds that help to multiply the bacteria that's already in our gut, whereas probiotics introduce new bacteria to our gut. So they add to what we have. But they both support obviously the health of our gut. So overall, I think in terms of this whole piece of usually where there's fiber, there's often kind of nutrient-rich foods in terms of, so, you know, when we think of the likes of vegetables or different types of grains, often you are getting not just fiber, but often the likes of your B vitamins, certain minerals, obviously in terms of fruits and vegetables, antioxidants, polyphenols, other types of beneficial components. And so they go very much hand in hand. And I suppose we would call those nutrient-rich foods because they often contain a lot of nutrients relative to the amount of energy that they provide or calories that they provide, that they can be a bit lower in calories, but they provide a lot of other health benefits. So the general rule, aiming for different colors. So thinking of like your different fruits, vegetables across the day, across the week, or across the month. And obviously having just some variety with in-season foods. Ideally, you know, consuming in-season foods is of greatest benefit. It's usually fresher, traveled less far, and less environmentally damaging. But aiming overall, thinking of that 80% of us aren't consuming enough fiber, so or of older persons aren't consuming enough fiber, and like by older person, that's usually over 65. So that piece of thinking across most of your meals and snacks, is there something there, whether from one of those like bottom or the two bottom shelves, that's helping to add fiber to your meal. Then eating good quality protein to protect your muscle strength. So we know that protein helps to maintain health as we age. It's well established that it's essential for stimulating muscle synthesis and maintaining our muscle mass. National studies have shown, and international actually, that about 1/3 of older adults have protein intakes below what's needed for adequate muscle function. That's kind of a European-wide piece of work. So again, this is definitely an area where more work is needed. We know that as we age, a more protein-dense diet is required. So kind of if you're under 65, the kind of typical amount of protein that's required per kilo is about 0.8 grams. But as we get older, it moves closer to 1 to 1.1 grams of protein for every kilo. So you do require a more protein-dense diet to kind of maintain a good muscle function. And I suppose in order to meet that need, it's recommended that there's 2 servings of high quality protein a day. So that's where your legumes, your meat, fish, poultry, eggs, suitable alternatives kind of come into play. And ideally you spread it across the day. So our body usually like synthesizes protein better kind of if it's given in smaller amounts over a slightly longer period of time than kind of one big amount at once. And I suppose where it kind of plays such an important role is in relation to frailty and sarcopenia, which essentially, frailty and sarcopenia are essentially conditions that are associated with significant losses in function and mobility. So they're really so frailty and sarcopenia has an impact very much so on our ability to live independently. We know that it affects up to 1/3 of older adults living in the community, and that number would be, or percentage would be much higher in, say, long stay residential units. And I suppose it's this whole piece of adequate muscle mass is needed as part of the picture of either trying to prevent frailty and sarcopenia or trying to slow the progression of frailty and sarcopenia. And so with a varied diet with sufficient protein and hand in hand with regular appropriate levels of physical activity within like what you can reasonably do, that those together help to offset frailty or like that slow the progression of frailty and sarcopenia. As I say, it's a key part of continuing to live independently as we age. Then in terms of protecting our bones with enough calcium and vitamin D, so calcium and vitamin D always go hand in hand. And I suppose vitamin D has gotten a lot of attention, kind of, especially over the last 15 years or so, in terms of its role in relation to bone health. The literature is like slightly variable on this, but it very consistently comes down on the side of the need for supplementation and the importance of adequate vitamin D levels for bone health. We know again that all older persons in Ireland, so under the national Irish guidelines, that need a supplement of 15 micrograms of vitamin D every day of the year, all year round. We know that about 1 in 8 adults, older adults, are deficient in vitamin D kind of throughout the summer or in general, but 1 in 4 become deficient in the winter. It's a sunshine vitamin where our skin is, once we are exposed to sufficient UV light, our skin is able to produce vitamin D for us. But the sun is not a recommended source of vitamin D, obviously, as a result, because of skin cancer risk. But we often tend to get some incidental exposure as a result of how good or not we are with our sunscreen. But even as we age, taking sun exposure out, we know that even if you were exposed to the sun, your capacity of your skin to produce vitamin D as you get older lowers. So it's more difficult for us to even make vitamin D from the sun. We also spend less time outdoors as we age. And again, our appetites decrease with age. So because vitamin D exists in really, like, naturally, it exists in a very small number of foods relative to the number of foods that we could have. And if you're eating fewer amounts or smaller amounts of an even smaller group of foods where vitamin D exists, and they're usually foods that we don't have high intakes of, particularly around oily fish in Ireland, it's just very, very difficult to, like, it's essentially not possible to get the level of vitamin D that you would need consistently every day through your diet alone. So even if you have like what you would consider to be a very good, well-rounded diet, that's still not enough. And a supplement, let's say, of 15 micrograms of vitamin D every day is required all year round. So alongside that supplement, like the sources, food sources of vitamin D are still a value, and you have your natural sources, so the likes of eggs and oily fish in particular are good. And then there's a lot more fortification of food on the market. So the likes of fortified milks, yogurt, cereals are also valuable sources of vitamin D. If you are consuming the likes of, say, fortified milk, it's always good to shake the carton before you pour, because the added nutrients that have fortified the milk sink to the bottom. So you always shake before you pour to disperse it throughout. To support, obviously, then alongside our vitamin D intake, that piece around sufficient calcium intake. So this is our next shelf up again. So our milk, yogurt, and cheese. Slightly different benefits to these, but all fundamentally centering around the calcium that they provide. Just bearing in mind that milk is often the least processed of the three. And then obviously yogurt can have some added sugars, and cheese some salt for preservation purposes. But they all obviously have value. We just tend to lean more towards, say, milk, for example, maybe where you're having slightly more of that relative to yogurt and cheese, but a balance across them all across the week is obviously fine. The average national intake, so the kind of national children studies and the national surveys have looked at this, and we're at almost just very slightly below 2 servings of dairy foods a day at the moment, which is better than most of Europe, but it's still below the recommendation, which is at 3 to 4 servings a day in Ireland. So ideally, to address this, aiming to have at least some dairy or a suitable alternative, like a suitable fortified drink. So like our like suitably fortified soya milk or soya drink, for example, with most meals or as snacks on most days is important. So again, trying to think of your meals and snacks. Is there that kind of fiber containing element? Is there that kind of dairy containing element to it for that well-rounded piece? Then looking at our best weight and minding this. So I suppose in terms of what our best weight is, so our best weight is the weight we can achieve while living the healthiest life you can truly enjoy. We're often very simplistic about weight in terms of, sometimes you'll hear the phrases calories in, calories out, eat smart, move more. And you know, whilst they're technically, there's a truth to those types of statements, the picture is much bigger than just those like sort of very binary statements. And I suppose this graph here, it's quite small there on the screen, but it essentially shows like all the different factors that play a role in why our weight presents the way it does. And we can see that there's far more than just two things, calories in, calories out. We know, of course, that about 70% of, about 70% of our weight effectively is genetically predetermined. So there's a strong genetic component to our weight, and that doesn't mean that it's inevitable that that a person would live in a larger body, for example. But it does mean that we're not all the same. We can't be all the same in terms of like how our weight expresses itself. So two people doing the exact same thing, the exact same amount of exercise, and yet they maybe their weight changes in different ways and will be totally expected, but that might surprise those people. And that's, I suppose, this whole piece that, you know, from a genetic predisposition standpoint, that even before our mother is like conceived us, the weight status of a mother impacts, like at conception impacts on the kind of set points that are set for children. How mothers exercise maybe over pregnancy, the kind of rate at which we grow in our first year of life, all create kind of certain set points that can be then triggered by certain environmental factors over the course of our lifetime. And that impacts then how we experience our weight over time. Like we all know, I suppose, somebody who's sort of able to eat whatever they want and not gain weight. And obviously that's not quite true, but it's more an indication that that person is less susceptible or less vulnerable almost to certain things that would provoke weight gain typically in people. So they might be less vulnerable or less affected by a certain factor than somebody who's standing beside them and is more vulnerable, either as a result of very early like childhood food experiences or like genetic components or other factors. So when we look at weight stigma, because sometimes that can be that can be a significant component. We might not all be living with overweight. A lot of us are, but you know, body dissatisfaction, regardless of weight status, is very common across society. And weight stigma, I suppose, refers to labeling, bias, stereotyping, discrimination, and or prejudice against people living with overweight. It's one of the few forms of stigma, I suppose, that's seen as widely acceptable still, where it's sort of seen as still okay to sort of be like, oh, have you lost weight? And kind of commenting on somebody's weight. And even if we mean it as a compliment, it's actually still quite an intrusive thing to say to somebody, because often people have really, really personal feelings, I suppose, about how their weight is, how it presents, how it changes, who's going to notice. So ideally, that's something we wouldn't be doing. I suppose in studies that have looked at this, and there are many, we know obviously it's a challenging form of stigma in that it's experienced multiple times a day because we eat multiple times a day. And so you can have external stigma, so people around you or society or media or whatever saying things, but also we've internalized stigma, so where we're saying things to ourselves. So like what children would pick up from what they understand or hear adults saying, can internalize that into sometimes very negative self-talk that can then come out multiple times a day. We know that in one of these studies, I suppose 75% of participants would have experienced stigma from family and friends, so they remain the biggest source of stigma. 70% from doctors, 50% from nurses, 35% from dietitians, So it's something that's kind of very pervasive throughout even healthcare, but society in general. It has no positive effects. Sometimes maybe kind of like saying it as it is, or just kind of people being quite blunt about these elements of our health. People might think that there's value in that, but there's no positive effect stigmatizing, which is effectively just shaming another person for who they are. And there's it serves no motivating function. So it's not the type of thing that empowers somebody to kind of feel more confident in managing their health. It usually makes people kind of like turn away and kind of curl up a little bit. So it's not helpful. And I suppose in particular, it's there, I think, for every decade. There's challenges throughout society and in the media in relation to the type of conversation that's set around weight. But I think particularly, in the 90s and the kind of early 2000s, there would have been really incredibly negative, intrusive kind of media coverage of celebrity bodies and so on. Even like sometimes even reflecting a little bit on how that might impact on how we think about people's weight. So I suppose, where did this all come in? I suppose the Health and Retirement Study looked at whether experiencing weight discrimination consistently over a period of your life, whether that was associated with an increased risk of dementia over a 10-year follow-up period. And they found that experiencing weight discrimination and stigma is associated with a 40% increased risk of dementia and poor cognitive outcomes as we age. And that association held despite controlling for age, sex, race, ethnicity, education, BMI, diabetes, hypertension, smoking, physical activity, genetic risk, depression, and depressive symptoms. And I suppose what that means when we talk about the association holds despite controlling for, it means that you could have somebody say with dementia, and we could say, oh, well, that's because they have hypertension though. Like the weight stigma is just something like, that's kind of incidental, but it was actually the hypertension that caused the dementia, and it was a key risk factor. But actually, when we control for that, we say, no, we've already taken the hypertension, we've already taken the BMI into account. And once you've even taken those into account, there's still room for kind of identifying risk factors, and weight discrimination and stigma is still a contributing independent factor to that health outcome. So it has significant cognitive harm when we treat other people that way for a prolonged period. So like that, there's with weight stigma comes like psychological, physiological, and behavioral responses that also tend to harm health over time. And I suppose like that, whether it's internalized or externalized stigma, or usually a combination of both, we're often less likely to be sociable. You don't want to maybe go out or meet up as much. And there's a negative cognitive effect to that. We avoid health services. We don't present as readily to, say, the GP, and that can lead to delays in diagnoses of kind of many like chronic health conditions in particular. People can develop maladaptive eating and coping strategies, which would include the likes of, emotional eating, eating in the absence of hunger, eating patterns where you might not eat a lot throughout the day, but then you would eat a lot at nighttime. There's also higher cortisol levels, or our stress hormones. So because you're maybe persistently on alert, or persistently self-conscious, persistently stressed about this issue. And then obviously cortisol feeds into this whole piece of higher levels of inflammation, and then an increased risk of chronic disease resulting from that. So bearing in mind, I suppose the challenges of this, particularly if it's something like whether it's relevant to yourself or relevant to others like friends or family members and so on. It is important that we're conscious, I suppose, of our self-talk around body weight. Even a study was found, even amongst children as young as 5 who were given, say, 2 photos. They were given 2 photos. They were the same children in each. The only thing that was different between the 2 photos was that one set of children in one photo were living in larger bodies compared to the other photo, but they were otherwise the exact same children. And children as young as 5 would have said that the children living in larger bodies were more stupid, ugly, lazy, and selfish compared to the children living in smaller bodies. And that comes from somewhere in a 5-year-old. That's children picking up something from their environment. So even being mindful ourselves at whatever stage of life we're at, of how we talk about ourselves, our own body weight, and also even then just personally for yourself, regardless of anybody who's in the environment around you, think of the types of conversations you might have had around your body weight, like throughout your lifetime, and really how helpful have they been or not. And if there's like persistent negative self-talk, like does it ever generate a positive benefit that somehow balances out all the negative self-talk? Usually not. So being mindful of that for ourselves, setting boundaries with other people. Sometimes if somebody is kind of going through kind of a change in their weight, it's okay to say to people, if I'm looking for any feedback on how I'm looking at the moment, I'll ask, but you don't need to tell me until I ask. And we can be kind of nice about it, but kind of saying, I'd really rather not like hear comments one way or another about what I'm looking like at the moment. Having compassion for where we're at now, kind of, there's not much value, and I suppose I should have been doing this 10 years ago, or why didn't I do this 10 years ago, or whatever. Kind of recognizing we're at like where we're at now is where we're at, and it's about working from this space to kind of enjoy your body as much as possible. Commitment to ongoing self-care and doing what your resources allow on a given day. So kind of recognizing that we can't necessarily hold the same level of commitment for ourselves every single day, because there are other family factors or work factors or other commitments that we have, that kind of we have to adapt to that. But trying to have that commitment and being fair to ourselves, just kind of knowing that we're doing what we can on a given day, every day if we can, to mind our health. And then keep moving. So last one, so just last couple of points. Obviously, this is key to so many of the principles, I suppose, that I've just summarized. Obviously, any movement is better than none. And I suppose even when we think of combining principles, so even the first one, making meals more sociable, like going for a walk with somebody and then having something to eat together. Even the likes of choosing like higher fiber foods. Fiber always comes with fluid and movement. Fiber, fluid, and movement are the three things to help prevent constipation. That we need them together. Same even with the likes of protein in terms of building muscle, and the likes of our calcium-rich foods. That you need movement alongside those to either build muscle or to strengthen bones. So moving is an underpinning principle alongside all of the others, or behind all the others. I suppose a study that looked at this, there was a systematic review. So again, one that kind of looked at lots of different studies together and looked at kind of patterns across them. And I suppose essentially they found that key motivators, in terms of motivators and barriers to physical activity amongst older persons and amongst those who were over 70, they found that the key motivators were support from family and friends, kind of social interaction, and like just personal benefits that are experienced, and kind of having appropriate facilities. So, being able to safely get to and from maybe a facility, or to have safe paths or brightly lit areas to work in. Barriers included concern about our physical health or fitness, and maybe fear of falls, or a history of falling, and environmental barriers. So again, not having like appropriate transport to get somewhere you need to go for physical activity. I suppose it's thinking about kind of those I suppose motivators and barriers, and particularly the barriers. I suppose as we age, there can be that mindset of slowing down or putting the feet up a little bit more. And it's obviously not about going helter-skelter all the time, but trying to kind of strike a little bit of balance, and not shortchanging ourselves in terms of doing less than we're capable of. And I suppose this piece of maybe trying to take a little bit of time to reflect or to chat amongst yourselves, I think, in terms of what might get in the way of physical activity for us sometimes, it's certainly an area that still continues to be very challenging in terms of us doing or meeting recommendations. And obviously chatting with others can help in identifying solutions. But also it's helped from that compassionate piece in terms of realizing a lot of us are in the same boat in relation to health challenges. And then finally, I suppose we can look at health as something that is highly individualized, kind of I'm looking after my health. But there is, a community aspect, obviously, to minding our health. And I suppose it's helpful for us, I suppose, to be aware of how do we contribute to a community of health. So even that piece of kind of, how do we talk about health? How do we talk about weight? How do we talk about our overall experience of our own bodies as they age? And then how do we ask for kind of help from our community to help us to manage our health? So whether that's like sharing physical activity, sharing meals, kind of reaching out to health services or to like community partnerships to kind of see what resources are available to you to support your health. It's this whole piece, I think, of recognizing that managing our health, like it's a collective, lifelong effort. And I suppose participating in that collective, kind of working together and being mindful of each other as well as ourselves, I suppose, has far greater rewards than going it alone. So I'll finish there.
Hi everyone, so my name is Chloe Murphy and I'm the Community Food Nutrition Worker in South Dublin County Partnership. So today I'm going to be discussing the Healthy Eating as We Age programme, which kind of follows on from Annemarie. She's given kind of the information, but it's going to be showing the kind of practical side. So just kind of aims for today. It's gone. Okay. Yeah, not working. Is that okay? No. So I'm just going to provide a brief overview of what my role is as Community Food Nutrition Worker, an introduction to the Healthy Eating as We Age programme, what the programme entails, and next steps. So just a brief overview of what the role is. So it's that the purpose of the post is to provide capacity for the Sláinte Care healthy communities to improve community health and well-being by addressing the issues of poor diet and food poverty. So over the previous year, like by listening to the community's needs, we have run numerous amount of programs and workshops. So that includes Cook and Move program, which is a whole family program. I've also done a saving energy and cost workshop, providing recipe cards for the local food bank, and also the Healthy Eating as We Age program. So as mentioned, this is the program we're going to focus on today. So just a little bit about how we develop the programme. So as mentioned, I work in South Dublin County Partnership, which is a local development company which address social exclusion. And we are two of the Sláinte Care healthy community areas, which is Tala and Clondalkin. And I'm part of the South Dublin County Partnership Health and Wellbeing team, and we work across the areas to determine key health inequalities. And we did notice that a major health inequality and noticeable gap was support with malnutrition in older adults. So when I started the role as a community food nutrition worker, I started to develop this programme, and I carried out a taster session in Clondalkin and Tala in October 2023, just to determine the needs and if there was any feedback from the taster session. And then I carried out a 4-week programme in May in 2024 for Clondalkin, which I've just finished up, and I'm currently running one in Tala. So just some goals. So the main goals of the programme is to increase healthy eating behaviours in older adults by educating and increasing cooking skills, reducing the risk of malnutrition as we age, supporting the participants with sustainable change, and increasing social connections by attending the programme. So then just a bit about the programme. So Healthy Eating as We Age is a free access programme that's aimed at 55 years plus. It's a 4-week programme which is split into cooking healthy balanced meals along with learning about nutrition as we age. So the meals that we prepare include chicken fingers, couscous salad, soup, brown bread, spaghetti bolognese, chicken curries, stews, burgers, wedges, apple crumble, depending on what the group choose. And then after we prepare the meal, the group can enjoy the food while we discuss a bit about healthy eating tips as we age. So here's kind of some of the nutrition content that I give, and also resources. So the 101 Square Meals recipe book, which you all can take one for today. We have the 65-year plus food pyramid and booklet. We also talk about the importance of protein, how to increase protein throughout your day, extra requirements as we age and the links with health implications, poor appetite, healthy eating on a budget, label reading, how to meal prep and plan using the fridge and freezer, food safety, serving size, healthy plate, daily meal plan examples, and a 3-week meal plan for one, a 3-week meal plan for two, with a grocery list and breakdown of costs. So lots of different content is given out throughout the weeks. It's just some early findings. So of course it's still early days to kind of determine key trends, but so far what we've been seeing is a lot of the participants are one adult households. They're overwhelmed by the kitchen and cooking for one, and they heavily rely on high fat, sugar, salt, convenient meals. And then key outcomes include kind of increasing their whole grains and lower salt, sugar options. They've increased confidence in the kitchen, and also confidence when meal prepping and food safety. So as mentioned, I ran my first program in Rolla Community Centre, so Clondalkin. So I'm just going to run through kind of each week and how it was set up, and you kind of get an idea of how the program runs. So this was the first week, so it's set up in our dance studio in Rolla Community Centre. And we have a big table where everyone comes in, takes a seat. And this week we prepared a couscous salad and chicken fingers. So here are some of the resources that were given on the first week. So we have our booklet for healthy eating for older adults, along with printouts as well. So I had the importance of protein and how to increase protein in your diet, and then also the food pyramid. So this was something that we ran through in the first week, but also giving them handouts so they can read when they go home. I didn't get to get a picture before we finished the meal, but as you can see, they all had lots, they tried lots of it. So we had our 10-minute couscous salad, and I added chickpeas into that too. So as you can see, it's 10 minutes, very quick to make. It's no cook as well. So you just have to soak the couscous, which is, a great option. And this was, the people were hesitant to try this, but they all really enjoyed it. And then we had our chicken fingers as well, which are made of whole grain bread and oats. So up in that fiber as well into our meal. We had our whole grain wraps. We had some hummus, some smashed avocado and salad as well. So yeah, the place was cleared. Week 2, we made soup. So we made a vegetable soup and a spicy tomato and red lentil soup. And here's just kind of an image of kind of other examples that we discuss throughout the program as well. So sometimes kind of chopping and peeling garlic can be difficult, but not just that, then we can have to buy 4 of them and they're going to waste, different things like that. So easy garlic or squeezy garlic, whatever ones you want to opt for. So we use that throughout the program. Again, I never got a picture before it was before everyone tried it, but as you can see, the spicy tomato and red lentil went down a treat. So everyone really enjoyed that, and they all kind of mentioned they hadn't tried it. They maybe had a bag in their cupboards, but didn't really know how to use it. So I was, yeah, they all really enjoyed it. And I was explaining how that's extra fiber and protein added into the soup as well. And here was our brown bread recipe ingredients, but again, I didn't get a picture before it was all gone. Sorry, this is the next one. So week 3, we had spaghetti bolognese, chili con carne, and chicken curry. So as you can see from the picture 1, we have a courgette. So a lot of participants hadn't either tried or they hadn't made it, used it themselves, but some of them had tried it before, but they've never cooked with it. So I kind of explained how it's very versatile vegetable. It can be added to a lot of things, easy to chop. So they all really enjoyed that in the meal. We also had whole wheat spaghetti and brown rice, which a lot of the participants again said they just opt for white out of habit, but they all really enjoyed it again in the meal and said they'd make that change going forward. So here they are in preparation. So our first picture is just our spaghetti bolognese and our chicken curry. And then the next picture is all 3 of our meals prepared. So I just showed how easy it is to convert a spaghetti bolognese into a chili con carne by 2 simple steps. Add some chili powder and kidney beans, and you have a totally different meal. And I explained how this can be great as well, cooking for 1 or 2. If maybe day 1 you want your spaghetti bolognese with your whole wheat spaghetti, then you can have change it to a chili for the next day. Have it with lots of different carbohydrate sources, such as on a wrap, a baked potato, wedges, or with brown rice. So it's a great way to change up a meal without having to make a totally new meal. Then here's some of the dishes that they were having. They have all kinds of meals mixed in together. They're trying the 3 of them. And again, just kind of some other things we discussed. So people were mentioning seasonings. So I was just kind of showing how, we need to be mindful of seasonings. The first ingredient of that all-purpose seasoning from Lidl actually had salt, was the first ingredient. So just be mindful of those things. They also mentioned how it can be really difficult to know the amount of pasta or rice to cook, especially when you're cooking for 1 or 2. You end up making enough for an army. So this cup here shows it's uncooked rice and uncooked pasta and couscous, and there's also dried porridge. So just to show what a serving is, and kind of give more an idea so that we won't have too much waste. And then we also have our lunch boxes here. So I showed how you can put it into a lunchbox, how to freeze it correctly, defrost it, different things like that. And finally, for our 4th week, we made we have our resources here, which is our 3-week meal plan breakdown with cost and grocery list, etc., and also meal plan examples. We also have our food label cards, and we made a sweet potato satay stew, which is our middle picture here. which was our favorite recipe out for the 4 weeks they reported back. And we also made an apple crumble. So we have preparation of it here, which is with whole grain, wholemeal flour and oats. And then here is some of the leftovers we had with some Greek yogurt as well. So just to kind of get an idea from feedback or how, if they increased their confidence. So every participant stated their knowledge of nutrition increased, and they also stated their confidence when cooking healthy homemade meals increased. And then here's just some quotes from the program. So I loved how hands-on the program was. You get to see the practical side while learning about nutrition. And I love listening to everyone's stories in the group. I loved how aware I am since starting the program. I've learned so much. I loved everything about the program. I hope it continues. And then just a little quote, someone else said, "You're never too old to learn new things." And then just to give an idea of kind of how the group is and how it's not an intimidating place to come along if you want to bring a friend or if you don't. Just a bit about the kind of groups. The facilitator was excellent. I started the program knowing nothing, but I've learned so much. Thank you. The facilitator showed how easy it was to eat healthy. And she explained everything well and was most helpful, kind and patient. So, it's a place that anyone can come along. So just briefly, some next steps. So run the program again in 2024 in both Tala and Clondalkin and receive feedback from the program to develop it further, and then advocate for the need for this program to run a number of times in both Tala and Clondalkin's launch care areas. So that's all from me. I have my contact details here, and I also have some posters for the programs that we do hope to run in October. So if you are interested, I can take your name, or you can take a poster and contact me at a later date. Thank you.